Wong Kar-wai is among one of the new auteur direction that has been influenced by Jean-Luc Godard, one of the pioneers of French New Wave. Drawing comparison between three films from each director, we attempt to understand how Godard influences Wong in terms of film technique, depiction of social and political climate of the nation and city, as well as gender dynamics. In the movie, Wong Kar-wai emphasized the patterns of fades and straight cuts. Tony pointed out how one cut relies on false continuity in the movie In the Mood for Love. When Chow is smoking alone in the room 2046, he hears a knock on the door, and it cuts to a long shot of Mrs. Chan at the door, but she's leaving. Thus, we'll never know what transpired during her visit, which exemplifies Wong's discontinuity in continuity. Days of Being Wild, that crystallized his style. Lush, visual poetry, elliptical character dramas, the way we, not just the Chinese, guard ourselves with perceived appropriate behavior. Even we are bursting with passion, and announced the arrival of the first Hong Kong director who could rival the skills of the fifth generation filmmakers. The entire film is a flashback, traversing different point of views in unfocused time duration. But the message is clear. With Days of Being Wild, Wong Kar-wai displayed a deep understanding of cinema, that when all else is stripped away, we still have images, and thus we must derive our emotions, our very being from them. In the movie 2046, Wong Kar-wai films his actors mostly in close-up and medium shots, with Baroque architectural details in the background, with cigarette smoke constantly coiling through the air. There are a lot of foreground screens, door jambs, draperies, walls, furniture, to add texture and detail while concealing parts of those faces. Weekend is full of political statements and French New Wave techniques. Jean-Luc Godard set out through the French countryside in order to secure their inheritance. Much of the imagery within the film is unpleasant as well, as it is full of scenes of death. The logic of the sequence is perfectly clear. Static alternation is combined with dynamic continuity. The sequence continues as Lloyd proceeds with his monologue, cut together with an array of photos, and reverse shot interplay with a cameraman and sound technician. Masculine feminine, insofar as it explores the mysterious ambiguous space where boys and girls interact, retains its relevance, and somehow Godard's distinctive filmmaking remains cutting edge. The simplified technique of masculine feminine offered a method, one that specifically befit the director's independent film about young people, the modern cinematic Bildungsroman. Both Wong Kar-wai and Jean-Luc Godard were making films about a politically unstable era, the 1960s. Wong's films set in the 60s in Hong Kong, while Godard's films set in 60s in France. Despite drastic different depictions of two vastly different regions, both auteurs utilize unconventional ways of storytelling that documents and constructs the political and social state of a nation or city of 1960s. The French youths live in an absurd political world in Godard's films. In Masculine Feminine, Godard's conjunctive editing and somber cinematography paint a contemporary Paris of the late 1960s in the eyes of the youths, which is filled with relationships between young men and women. The characters might not be expressing political sophistication, but they mentioned political buzzwords at the time. The Weekend is an anti-realist movie where the characters brought up meaningless political questions that were devoid in content. By the time Godard made La Chinoise, political affairs and discussions came back to the center of the subject matter because Godard tried to mock the leftist revolutionary ideals, and the ideals led up to a meaningless behaviors. On the other hand, Depicting aimless youths roaming about a 1960s urban landscape is also a persistent theme in Wong Kar-wai's films. However, these youths live in an unfulfilled or unrequited world of romance. Adopting from Godard's visually disruptive style, Wong foregrounds his films with romantic dynamics in his unofficial trilogy, Days of Being Wild, In the Mood for Love, and 2046. However, lurking from the background is constant struggle of maintaining individuality from society, but more importantly, individuals' lack of attachment and connection towards the society. This loss of connection can be interpreted as Hong Kong, a singular entity's lack of sense of belonging to a nation. Both Hong Kong and France was experiencing an economical prosperity during 1960s. Godard documents France's social and political shift to the left in the present, whereas Wong Kar-wai documents his own recollections of a long-gone era and the city's sense of lack of nationhood in the 1960s. Despite the differences in content having been influenced by Godard's visual style, Wong manages to similarly paint a portrait of the city's social state with relationships between men and women in his films. Jean-Luc Godard's films were made around the 1960s. We can see that his films still tend to influence filmmakers of more recent times, such as Wong Kar-wai. Regarding gender and their roles, we can see that Wong Kar-wai's films have aspects or Godard's take on gender as well. A few common aspects regarding gender in Godard's films are that women are sexual beings, less powerful as the male characters, and are to be obedient to or used for men. In one of Godard's films, Masculine Feminine, women are constantly captured on screen as the male gaze. For example, the purpose of the scene is not for her to brush her hair thoroughly multiple times, but to simply appear appealing to the male gaze. The same can be seen in Wong Kar-wai's films. Wong's close-ups on women are not very significant to the story's development and are meant only to give the female characters screen time to appear beautiful for audiences. Both filmmakers, Godard and Wong, tend to exemplify beauty commonly desired and sought out for by society, using close-ups of beautiful female characters. In Godard's films, women are sexualized and are much more staged as a sexual being as opposed to men. Here, his film has a scene of a woman describing her sexual experience and mentions that majority of it was being ordered around by a male and her having to comply with another woman. Wong reflects the same concept Godard filmed in a scene in his movie called Days of Being Wild, where the main lead, who juggles multiple women at a time, allows one to leave without concern about her safety or well-being, and the other he abuses sexually. In some scenes of Godard's films, women are to use their bodies to receive or accomplish something the male cannot do on his own. Here, the woman is told to spread her legs open on the street floor to capture the attention of the male driver, while the male who instructed her to do so hides among the dead bodies. Women tend to be seen as lesser than males in his films. Whereas Wong's films, though males tend to have more power than women sexually and physically, feeling-wise, Wong tends to keep emotions of both males and females at a similar level. Here, these two characters discover that their spouses are both cheating on them together, and they both share the same sorrow. Though Wong does not copy almost every aspect regarding gender roles in Godard's films, we can still see Wong is still influenced by the French New Wave filmmaker. Godard's influence on Wong's films are very present in this way. Through the comparison of two New Wave directors from two very different eras and regions, we sought out similarities and differences in their films in terms of film techniques, depiction of the nation or the city the directors came from and set their movies in, and the dynamic of two different genders in the film text. With similar disruptive and conjunctive editing and stories structured in discontinuity, Godard and Wong paint two different portraits of a nation, city, and state in its own social or political crisis. Exemplified in the three movies introduced at the beginning, Wong paints a portrait of a 1960s Hong Kong with seemingly disjointed stories about unfulfilled romantic relationships between men and women.